When I was in high school, I kind of dreaded taking the SAT. It seemed like the only way to get a good score was to either bury your head inside test prep books for hours and hours, or hire a SAT tutor. Also, I was and still am pretty lazy, and so I wanted to get the best score with the least amount of work possible. It seemed like kind of a gamble, and I didn't know if what I was doing would actually work, but it paid off. It actually worked. I took the PSAT 2 times and the SAT 2 times, and all 4 times my test score was in the 99th percentile. I'll put my test scores up here. But I'm not saying this to brag about myself. Instead, what I want to do is I want to share what I did so that you guys can prepare for the SAT without having to go through so much pain to get that test score, especially for those who can't afford external tutoring or some of the resources that others might have. Now, one thing I want to be clear about before I talk about my methods is that you still have to do work. You can't do well on the SAT without having prepared or practiced at all, right? But the things that I did, I tried to make things as fun as possible, because even if you're doing work, if you find it fun or at least bearable, then it's not gonna feel as painful as something that you feel forced to do and that you don't really want to spend your time doing. For me, that was studying out of test books. That's something I just wanted to avoid at all costs. And so to avoid that, I came up with these methods to do that same practice in a different format. So first, I'll talk about the English portion of the SAT. The key to doing well is to read every day. And there are several parts to this piece of advice. The first is to find things that you want to read about. For me, the things that I'm interested in are soccer, technology, politics, history. And so I'd read a lot of ESPN articles, The Verge, The New York Times, and I'd have a weekly subscription, or not weekly, but a subscription to Time magazine. Finding something that you want to read about, say fashion or cooking or pop culture, you can read about those things too. Reading things that you want to read about will make it a lot easier to build this habit long term and to stay consistent with it. And once you have that experience, you'll find it easier to pick out the main ideas of what the author is trying to say and how the different parts of the article build into that central message the author is trying to say. Also, I think reading nonfiction is probably a good idea, because it seemed to me that a lot of the passages that the SAT test uses are kind of that nonfiction format and prose. I think if I had read a lot of fiction instead, I might not have been as well prepared for the SAT, but I didn't read that much fiction, so I might be wrong. But also, reading fiction is better than reading nothing at all, right? So I guess just read what you want, but if you like nonfiction, that's a plus. Nonfiction is good. The last part of this is to be aware of certain things while you're reading, specifically words that you don't know and grammar. While reading articles, I'd read things in a specific way to get better at these specific things. First, definitions. Let's say I'm reading a Time magazine article and I come across a word that I don't know. First, I'll try to figure out what that word means using context clues, what the general article, the specific paragraphs are talking about. And then if I can't figure out what that word means, then I'll look it up online and see what that definition is. Then I'll try to remember it, and generally those type of words come up often, and so once you look it up once, it'll eventually stick. When I first started, I had to look up words pretty frequently, but once I kept reading and reading, I got to the point where even if I didn't know what a word specifically meant, based on the context clues, I could generally figure out the gist of what it meant. So to give you an example of how I would do this, I'm going to read an article out of this December 2020 issue of Time magazine. And this article is titled Our Awful Year, which it was an awful year, wasn't it? And I'll link the article down in the description too. I'm gonna read some sentences out of the third paragraph of this article. So the first sentence: our most debilitating threat this year was a sense of helplessness, and it ran unchecked. Here, I might not know what the word debilitating means, but the word helplessness is nearby, and that kind of implies that like something's taking away our ability to do something. And the word ability also has the same root as the word debilitating. So this is making me think that the word debilitating has to do something about the lack of ability or a restriction on ability. I'll read the second sentence too. Although it's universal among humans to believe in their own fortitude, Americans in particular are conditioned to believe they can triumph over any crisis. So the word here that seems kind of tricky to me is fortitude. I don't know what that exactly means, but in the second half of the sentence, it talks about how Americans believe that they can triumph over any crisis, right? And so this is kind of like Americans' ability, their belief in their ability, the ability to overcome something. And so that makes me think that the first part of the sentence also has to do something about ability, strength to overcome something. And so I think fortitude means that, kind of the strength of overcoming things. And even if what I think isn't maybe like the exact dictionary definition, because of my use of context clues, I can generally get a good enough sense of what that word means in order to be able to understand the wider context and answer test questions on the SAT. While I'm reading, I'll also pay attention to things like grammar, and I do this by reading things in my head as if I were reading them out loud with my voice. And when I read them with my voice, I intonate in a certain way so that I know where punctuation goes. So I'll read the third sentence. But not since the spread of fascism in the 1930s, a threat America didn't actively recognize until the dawn of the 1940s, have we been faced with so many abnormal events that have been so egregiously distorted by aberrant leadership. And so here, the sentence shows me that if I want to interject something in the middle of a sentence, what I have to do is I have to put hyphens at the start and at the end of the thing that I want to interject in the middle. And the way I kind of intonate my voice, how I take a breath at the beginning of the hyphen and the end of the hyphen, kind of builds a rhythm in how I read things. This method is also helpful with commas, because commas are tricky and they come up a lot on the SAT. But if you read in a certain way, you kind of see where the comma should go based on the way you're reading. So this sentence is from the second paragraph. It was, in addition to being wrought with pain, maddeningly mundane. The routine of the everyday turned against us. And so here, because of the way I'm reading it, I kind of see where the commas need to go in the sentence. Now, I don't have every single grammar rule memorized, and I think I'd probably struggle a bit more if I had a test that was asking me specifically on these grammar rules. But after reading so many articles and paying attention to these certain things, the correct grammar kind of feels right. It's almost like a gut instinct. And I found that after reading so many articles, when I was going through the grammar portion of the SAT, the right answer kind of just stuck out to me because it felt more right than the other ones. And I think this comes with building that experience of reading consistently over a long period of time. And in an article, if you come across something that confuses you, look it up, look up the rule. So for me, a rule that confused me for a long time was when to use a semicolon versus a colon. After I looked it up, it started to make more sense to me, and when I would see semicolons or colons come up in articles, I could see, oh, that's why they used a semicolon instead of colon in the sentence. The internet is really your best friend. It's so convenient, and so utilize it to figure out things that you don't know. Now for the math portion. My method of studying for the math portion was to join my school's math team. You're probably thinking to yourself right now, of course you would enjoy it because you're a nerd. And I'd say, yes, you're right, I am a nerd. But no, I didn't even enjoy doing the math part of math team. The reason I did math team was because of the community and the camaraderie that you get from joining math team. And even though I didn't necessarily enjoy learning like hard stuff, because of that community that I had there, I had more of a reason to do it, and it made it more bearable and I think less soul-sucking than if I had just had to study out of a textbook. In my math team, we would take SAT math sections and then we'd get tutored on them by older members of the math team. And having friends or at least other students tutor me was maybe more comforting, or at least better than maybe having like a random stranger tutor you on the sections. Also, I think math team is really good because you can knock out two things at once. You can get your score up by coming to math team, and also you can put something down on your extracurriculars for college apps. If you just get tutored outside at some tutoring center, you can't really put that on your extracurriculars, right? Like I went to SAT tutoring. It just doesn't work, you know? But with math team, you can put it on there, and you can build a better extracurricular section while getting your test score up. Doing a lot of math team is good because doing math team shows you how to manipulate numbers, interpret what equations, graphs mean, and really pinpoint what math questions are asking you. I remember when I first looked at SAT sections, they were questions that were intimidating because they just had large numbers, or the way the problem was packaged was complicated. But after being in math team for a while, I learned to see through all of that and get to the bottom of, okay, what is this question specifically asking me? So I have one question here pulled up, and it looks kind of complicated, right? Big numbers, a lot of text, just the amount of words sometimes, gets to your head, right? But if you really look at it, all it's asking you is to give this equation to find temperature in terms of speed of sound. And if you look, you see that what the question's already given you is the opposite of that. The speed of sound given air temperature. And so I know all I have to do is to isolate air temperature, T. So I do that by subtracting 1052 to the other side and then dividing 1.08 from T. And then I have the answer, option A. These things become a lot clearer to you once you start doing a lot of math team. And so this is why I think it's beneficial for you to do this. It makes this math section a lot easier. My last tip is to take advantage of free resources around you. One thing I would use sometimes is Khan Academy's online practice problems. And the week before an SAT test, I'd usually run through one of College Board's free SAT tests that they have on their website. I'll link that down in the description too. I didn't want to go into the SAT cold, without having done any practice problems at all. And so it really helps using these online resources. If you want to go down the route of using test prep books, you can even go to the library and they'll probably have a couple of copies lying around for you to check out. There are a lot of places that want to make test prep more accessible to people, and so look out for those opportunities and take advantage of them. And yeah, that's how I study for the SAT without test prep books or outside tutoring. It might seem a little ad hoc and you might be skeptical as to whether this might work for you. But given enough time and consistency, this will work. This is not something to do like 1 week before your test. This isn't like a video to tell you how to cram, right? I'm showing you habits that should be implemented long term so you can spread out the work over a longer period of time to not stress you out as much. I started reading articles when I was in middle school, and I started doing math team maybe around a year and a half before I took my first SAT. And so I had a lot of practice in between when I first started these activities and when I first took my tests. And so really time and consistency is the key to the methods that I've described here. Work on these habits and it'll be worth it because you'll have way more time to focus on your extracurriculars, which I think is probably more important than what your actual SAT score is. Alright, so that's how I study for the SAT. Thanks guys for watching. I hope that was helpful. If you guys have any questions, put them down in the comments and I'll be sure to answer them. Good luck with your SAT studying and see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.